Another video on making cider. So I've made cider a few times now in different kind of ways. I've made it with most of my homemade home collected yeast, but I've got some champagne yeast now. And a couple of days ago, my cider from my sister's apple tree was ready, and it was very nice. But it didn't take that long to ferment. It took about 2 weeks once it got going to ferment with both types of yeast, so champagne yeast and the naturally collected yeast, wild yeast, if you want to call it that. But the cider that I made before using my home collected yeast and some cheap supermarket apple juice, it's from concentrate, it's got no sweeteners in, it's got no sugar in, it's just concentrated apple juice, which they then reconstitute with, well, they boil it to reduce it, and then they reconstitute it with water. And I presume that when they reconstitute it, they constitute it back to a certain level of sugar and a certain level of acidity, which will kind of, they'll use lots of different types of apples. It won't be just like one type of apples. It'll just be like lots of odds and sods of apples that might not make the grade for going into the supermarket. So it might just be like loads of different types of apples. They'll just boil it, reduce it, or might even boil it, but they'll take the water out of it, make it into a concentrate, and then to make it into cheap supermarket apple juice, and the apple juice that's the normal price as well. The stuff from concentrate, they just add water to it, and I presume they just take it to a certain viscosity, and the viscosity will kind of be dictated to. So like a certain viscosity of a fruit syrup will have a certain amount of sugar into it, because essentially it is just a sugar water, I think. But when I made it before, it took about a month, if not even longer. So I want to do the experiment again. I want to use my the cheap supermarket cider, and then I want to use some fast-acting, no, not fast-acting yeast, my champagne yeast that I bought for a bit of fun. So the container is sterilised, and I pour it straight from the container straight into the sterilised. That smells yeasty. It's straight into the into the bottles. So everything should be now sterilised. I'm sure this is still fermenting, but we'll just kind of check. And then I want a couple of teaspoons of wild collected yeast in there, and then we'll use the what we call it method. We'll use the balloon method. So I have. So, if I remember rightly, we'll put red on the champagne yeast. I washed these out, and what we call it, and they've got a hole in them, so that's fine. So we don't need to use proper airlock. Although airlock's pretty cheap to buy, I just think if we can do things on the cheap, why not? You know, like I always kind of say, you know, if you're going to start a hobby, you start it like a cheap way. To start a hobby, and then you work your way up to make it a more expensive kind of hobby by using proper demijohns and proper different yeasts and proper airlocks and all that kind of stuff. Or you can just start with a couple of old glass bottles and some balloons and some home collected yeast. So we'll see how long this takes to ferment. The champagne yeast will start acting quicker, so I'll just leave it. It'll be a couple of days before they start. I'll just leave it somewhere relatively warm, and then we'll kind of see what happens. A slight setback with the fermenting this apple juice. It's my home collected yeast had died. I don't know if I put the lid on a little bit too tight when it was in the fridge. But it's died, so that apple juice hasn't fermented. Champagne one is going really well. It's still fermenting. It's been like a week-ish. Yeah, about a week and a couple of days. Oh. No, maybe 2 weeks. Maybe a week and a half. Something like that. What day is it today? Can't remember. Probably coming up to 2 weeks. So I've started to make another wild yeast collection from some grapes. It's starting to ferment down the bottom. I don't want to tip it up because you won't be able to kind of quite see. So I think I'm going to. It's also, I don't know, I've started another one as well, but nothing much happening with that one. When did I start that one? Those were the grapes from Friday, weren't they? So this one's slightly fermented. It's just taking a little bit longer, and it was getting a little bit of mold growth on the top, and not good mold growth. Well, green mold growth, which is white mold growth that we really want. But it's fermenting down the bottom. So I think to myself, I'm gonna risk it and pour some of this into here. Now I'm not 100% really bothered about this apple juice if it works, because I've already done it before. Let's put a fair old amount in there. So we'll definitely get some yeast in that. So I've done this before with this apple juice with my home collected yeast, and it took quite a long time to ferment. So if this one doesn't work, I'm not that bothered. What we'll do is we'll carry on collecting some wild yeast, hopefully in that one, and we'll carry on hopefully collecting some wild yeast in this one. Although I think it'll probably just end up going off. Let's just mix it around and see if the yeast that we've collected in there might just kill off any bacteria. So I'm not that bothered if it doesn't work. I'm more interested in this champagne yeast and see how long that actually takes. So that on there, and we'll see what happens. And if this goes bad, now I'll put some of this wild yeast from that in. I'm not that bothered. It was just for like more of a comparison more than anything else. And we'll see if that one starts to ferment. And then if hopefully it'll start to ferment, and then we'll be able to collect some yeast from that one as well. So that back on. Oh yeah, and I had to change the colour of the balloon as well, because the champagne yeast wanted to it frothed up into the balloon and caused all kinds of problems. So I've had to change the balloon on that one. But anyway, so quick update. We'll have a look at these hopefully when they start fermenting. So there we go. We are starting to get fermentation from the new wild yeast that I collected, which happened kind of quite quickly. So I put the yeast in yesterday, and it's already started to fermenting. So that's pretty good. And I did check the dates. So we're about a week behind. Sorry, we're about a week behind. So I started the fermentation using the champagne yeast on the 22nd of September, and now we're on the 1st of October. Depends when this video kind of comes out, but we're about 9 days behind, something like that. Is it about 9 days? I don't know. But like a week and a bit behind schedule. So when we're talking about fermentation, we'll kind of, when the champagne yeast is ready, we'll know that this other yeast should be a week kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't know what I'm trying to say. We just need to know that the question is, will this wild yeast take a week longer to finish fermentating than the champagne yeast? I was talking to my friend yesterday who brews beer, and I talked myself through it with him, and we were talking about the wild yeast that I used and the champagne yeast that I used to ferment the apple juice from my sister's tree, and they both finished roughly at the same time, and of course they finished roughly at the same time because it was equal amounts of sugar in both fermentations that we were doing. So it wouldn't matter if what yeast we used, the amount of sugar in the apple juice dictated how long it would ferment. So as soon as that sugar had been turned into alcohol, then that would be the end of the fermentation. And this apple juice that I'm using here, the bought apple juice, which comes from concentrate, obviously took a lot longer to ferment because there was more sugar in it. So it wouldn't matter. The other experiment that I did with my sister's apple juice with the two different types of yeast didn't really matter, because the there was a lower amount of sugar in the in the juice. So what I'm trying to say? What am I trying to say? Yeah, so it just wasn't a good experiment. We needed something with a higher amount of sugar in, and then we'll be able to kind of see. I'm not making much sense. I can't. I probably need to have a think about what I'm going to. My deductions. Deduce. Why am I struggling with my words? So I really should have to think about what I'm trying to deduce from these experiments. But anyway, it's working, and I've already rattled on far too long. But anyway, it started, and it's a week behind the other, week-ish behind the other fermentation. So we'll just kind of keep an eye on it, and we'll see how long it ferments for. Cider is ready. It's taken about 3 weeks. About 3 weeks. So this is the champagne yeast cider that was stopped fermenting about a week and a half ago. So I took the balloon off the top and I put a lid on it, and it's been in the fridge. And then this one stopped fermenting yesterday. Although I was cooking in the kitchen, it was fermenting a little bit for the last week or so. So this one started a week later than that. So then this one was slowly fermenting for this last week. So what I did do, I was cooking last night, and I put it on the back of the oven, and it started fermenting quicker, and then it stopped fermenting. Not that I've killed the yeast in it. The yeast just kind of like exhausted itself and took up and kind of poisoned itself by producing more alcohol, which is what happens. That the yeast produces alcohol, and then as the alcohol level of something gets higher, it eventually ends up killing the yeast, and that's what stops fermentation. And that's why I think I've talked about this in this video anyway. Don't know why it only took about 3 weeks this time. Maybe it was because it was a larger volume I made of it first time around. Yeah, I made 5 litres of it, and that's probably why it took so longer, and that's why it's probably taken less time. But I can't understand why it took about 3 weeks for each of these to brew, to ferment. Because I would have thought that the champagne yeast would have fermented quicker than the natural yeast that I'd collected from the grapes, unless by accident I've collected a different type of yeast than I used before. So many questions that we'll never really find the answers out of, but it's much more important that we taste. So I think to myself that the champagne yeast one will be drier, as in less sweet, because the yeast will have turned more of the sugars into alcohol, and therefore made a drier, less sweet cider. And then my home collected yeast will be sweeter and have less alcohol in. That's kind of like the thoughts anyway. So let's give it a taste. So this is the champagne yeast one. I haven't bothered siphoning it into anything else. I can't be bothered doing that. It's only me drinking it. And I'll do some. There's a little bit of yeast collected at the bottom. Can we see? A little bit of yeast debris collected at the bottom. I'll do something with that at some point. So I think what we'll do, if it's champagne yeast, if it's a little bit too dry, then we can always mix them. So, and I don't know what the alcohol content's going to be. Champagne yeast maybe 12%, I guess. The what we call it? I've got packets in the freezer. The home collected yeast maybe 4%, 5%, something like that. So champagne yeast. No, let's taste the less alcoholic one first. No, it's not that sweet. It's got that fermented flavour to it. It's a little bit. I always think of fermented flavour. It's a little bit funky. in flavour. So nice, not too dry, not really kind of sweet anymore. Oh, that tastes different. So mind you, that might be down to being in the fridge for a little while. So let's just get the chill off the bottle. This champagne yeast one is clearer, so the home collected yeast is a little bit cloudier. So if I go on the dryness, as in the non-sweetness of it, I would have said that the champagne yeast is certainly more stronger. Nice. It's nice. Yeah, so I suppose I haven't really measured the alcohol content, have I? So we can't really kind of do like a proper comparison. But there's no huge amount of difference in flavour. There is a difference in flavour, but it's not like it's not like a massive noticeable, that one's kind of quite sweet and this one's kind of quite dry. It's not kind of that kind of noticeable, but it's not like a huge amount of difference. It's not the difference between like apples and pears type of thing. It's not. Yeah. Do you know, I think I prefer that one. There's more apple flavour left with it, left in it than that. So there's more apple flavour there. So I think I prefer that one for whatever reason. Yeah. What was the purpose of this experiment? I don't know. It was down to time and alcohol content and flavour, wasn't it? Really. How was it worth buying champagne yeast? Probably not, actually. Probably not, unless you're wanting something that's actually stronger. Then, if you're wanting to produce something that's got more alcohol in it, then obviously you buy the champagne yeast. Otherwise, you just collect your own yeast and make your kind of own. Interesting all the same. Yeah, I think with making the cider from the apples from my sister's apple tree. I say sisters, it's my brother-in-law's tree as well, obviously. So I think there must be. So thinking about it off the top of my head, the flavour of the apples is important because that flavour will impart into the cider. The yeast that you use to make the cider is important as well. I don't necessarily think it has to be. Yeah, so the yeast you use is kind of important, and also the level of sweetness is important as well. The experiment I did before, I did the two types of yeast with my sister's apple juice. They both fermented in the same amount of time and tastes kind of similar. So they both stopped fermenting when they had run out of sugar, and because there was the same amount of sugar, then that's when it stopped fermenting. Whereas this, it's certainly a uniformed apple juice, and there was more sugar in there, but it wasn't like an interesting apple kind of flavour. So I think there will be apples that you particularly use to make cider. There'll be certain varieties where you get a good amount of flavour and a good amount of sweetness from the apples, and that will make a particularly good cider. And then probably have more, and that will probably the variety, the flavour of the apple and the sweetness of the apple, I think will have more bearing on the cider that you make rather than the yeast that you use, because there's not that much flavour difference. The only difference is that one's going to be higher content of alcohol than the other, but because you're using a yeast that extracts more, that gets up to a higher alcohol content, then you're going to lose kind of sweetness, which affects the kind of flavour of it. So I think that's me summing it up. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, so for my own benefit, the apple and the low sweetness is much more important in the cider. It's much more important than the yeast that you actually use. I think if I was to want to make more cider from the apples from my sister's tree, I think the idea would be to sweeten it up and maybe put some honey in, so it was more like so it'd up the sugar content, and it wouldn't, you're not just adding like a granulated white sugar, you're adding a sugar which is more interesting, so you're adding like another flavour kind of profile. So maybe taking the juice from those apples and then adding honey it would make it more interesting and take the alcohol level kind of up and waffling. I think that's it. I think that was the purpose of this video, wasn't it? But anyway, interesting. You know, the yeast doesn't make that much difference. Obviously it makes it stronger, but there we go. I think that's all I've got to say, all I'm kind of thinking about. But if something else crops up, I'll add a bit more to the video. But I don't think so. I think it's, from my understanding, it's pretty. I've kind of understood from it what I want to kind of understand. I don't know any cider makers. I think I'd have to probably pick the brain of someone who makes cider to kind of find out. I'm sure there will be like a master cider maker somewhere. And that's kind of but it's interesting. Oh, I find it interesting anyway. So and I'm going to enjoy drinking them. Should mix them. That's what we should do. Yeah, so let's put a bit more in this one. And put a bit more in that one. There's more of a golden hue to that one. I don't know if that's down to where it's sat on the chopping board. So big quantities. No, I think the champagne yeast one looks nicer because that one's slightly cloudier. Anyway, so let's make some sort of about 50-50. I think it's nicer when it's mixed. Anyway, yeah, but you couldn't. I don't think you can mix yeasts. I don't think you can mix yeasts. No, I don't think you can. I think because when you collect a sourdough starter, you generally collect a few different types of yeast when you're making a sourdough starter, and then over time the dominant yeast takes over from the other yeast. So not that it'll kill them, but like the stronger yeast will take over from the other yeasts that are in there, and so that will react quicker and will eat the food quicker in something. So therefore the other yeast don't have as much chance to reproduce, and then because the dominant yeast is reproducing faster, there's more of it, so it eats more of the sugars, so the other yeast have even less of a chance. So the stronger it gets, and the weaker they get, until there's not enough of them about and they just kind of like expire, and then the dominant yeast just dominates the kind of flavour and the sourdough starter. So I think it must be the same with brewing alcohol. You can't mix types of yeast because one yeast is just going to become dominant anyway, So and so there's no point. So you any kind of benefits that the other yeast would add to the alcohol, you wouldn't get those benefits because the dominant yeast just takes over, you know. But anyway, there we go. Interesting all the same. It's Sunday night. I'm going to enjoy a drink.